It's an early morning start for Will Powell, another stage in his journey to discover the truth. This time, it's a change in direction. Will Powell had wanted an inquest into the death of his son Robbie when the boy died in April 1990.
The coroner took the view from the outset that this was death by natural causes. William, of course, took a completely different view and endeavoured to persuade the coroner to change his mind and to order an inquest.
He never gave up and eventually won the support of the Attorney General in London. The inquest was formally opened 10 years after Robbie's death.
Absolutely nothing has changed. The circumstances are exactly the same. It beggars belief, frankly, in my view, that an inquest was never ordered on day one.
The resumed inquest opened in Carmarthen in January. The Pembrokeshire coroner, Michael Howells, agreed to preside. His jurisdiction was outside the Swansea Valley, where there'd been years of controversy. The venue wasn't big enough. The inquest was immediately switched to the National Botanic Gardens. After 3 weeks, the inquest was adjourned. The former Swansea Crown Court in the Guildhall became its new home when the inquest resumed last month.
I think for a jury to stop, as they have done, isn't very constructive as far as they're concerned. What on earth they've made of all this, I just don't know. Frankly, from my point of view, if I'd have been a member of that jury, then I would have been wondering what has been going on here.
Will Powell represented himself because of the cost. His wife had a legal team, as did the doctors and the hospital. Even the coroner had expert legal advice. All the GPs gave evidence. It was the first time they'd given their version of events in public. All were adamant they'd done nothing wrong. It was disclosed that Dr. Williams had suspected Robbie might have had leukemia.
I was absolutely amazed that something so serious should have been suspected and not acted on, in the sense that Dr. Forbes wasn't contacted immediately.
A number of experts gave complex medical evidence. Some of it concerned the hospital consultant Dr. William Forbes, who had the earliest chance to save Robbie. He didn't give evidence at the inquest, but his role was closely examined. The experts agreed he should have done the test that would have saved Robbie's life 4 months before he died. One expert reserved his most serious criticism for Dr. Nicola Flower. She'd seen Robbie twice on the day he died. On her first visit, chance number 8, to save the child, she told the jury he was unwell but not seriously ill. She was giving evidence from memory and not from medical notes.
The inquestors heard evidence that when Robbie was admitted to hospital, his lips were sticking to his teeth. He was in extremis. It beggars belief that he wasn't in that condition some hours previously, at 3:30 when Dr. Flower saw him for the first time. It definitely beggars belief that he wasn't in that condition just after 5 o'clock when she saw him for a second time.
Coroner Michael Howells told the jury after 19 days of evidence they could bring in one of 3 verdicts: natural causes aggravated by neglect, or unlawful killing. He warned them they could only consider 2 of the doctors, the consultant William Forbes and Dr. Flower, when it came to verdicts of neglect and unlawful killing. After 6 hours of deliberations, the inquest jury returned a verdict of death by natural causes aggravated by neglect on Robbie Powell. The family was disappointed with the verdict.
They promised him on his deathbed that I tried to establish the truth. I believe that I partly fulfilled that promise. It's the system that's failed us and Robbie, and I'll still battle on.
The jury decided doctors Mike Williams, Paul Bolatz, Elwyn Hughes and Keith Hughes were not to blame for the neglect.
Rigorous scrutiny of their actions by the expert witnesses resulted in a direction by the coroner to the jury that any verdict of neglect did not relate to their care of Robbie.
The jury considered that Dr. Nicola Flower may have been neglectful on the day Robbie died.
Dr. Flower is a dedicated general practitioner, and as the coroner observed, She was moved to tears when reliving again in court the events surrounding Robbie's death.
Because of a contested coroner's ruling, Will Powell was not allowed to introduce evidence about sensational police investigations which reached their climax last year. The police were called in by Will Powell and his solicitor 4 years after Robbie died. They took volumes of material to the police. Chief Superintendent John Daniels was the man in charge.
He personally just failed us as a police officer. I mean, I think if a PC or a detective constable was appointed to do that job, he would have done it far better than Mr. Daniels did.
The results of Daniels' investigation were sent to the Crown Prosecution Service, who decided there was no case to answer.
We were very concerned that they weren't investigating it properly. And that concern remained throughout.
Will Powell was also convinced the investigation wasn't carried out properly.
He didn't take any witness statements from the relevant witnesses, such as myself and my wife.
The Powells' formal complaint against the CPS was investigated but rejected. He bombarded Dyfed-Powys police with letters asking searching questions. He found out that the head of CID, Chief Superintendent Dyfed-Powys, had written a remarkable letter to lawyers acting for the GPs. He told them, "I can now confirm that no further action will be taken by the police. It was to have far-reaching consequences." A new Chief Constable, Terence Grange, took over at Dyfed-Powys Police in March 2000. He decided to reopen the case of Robbie Powell. He contacted West Midlands Police. Detective Chief Inspector Bob Poole had considerable experience of reinvestigating old cases. This was to be a job he'd never forget.
It was my intention to retire at the end of 2000. I was approached by my bosses and asked if I would be prepared to review a case.
He came to Carmarthen for what he thought would be 2 days. His review of Robbie's death and the subsequent events took 4 months to complete. It resulted in 2 further investigations, one carried out by him.
I consider what happened with Robert Powell and the subsequent events to be very much in the public interest of us all. And I felt there was a clear need to seek answers for some of those questions that had remained elusive to that time.
Senior officers of the Avon and Somerset Police were called in to carry out the other investigation under the Police Complaints Authority. Their criticism of Dyfed-Powys Police, responsible for policing almost half of Wales, was to be unprecedented and damning. They took the unusual step of going to the Powells' home.
Thank you very much for coming, all of you. Thank you, and thank you.
Their investigation found that Dyfed-Powys Police failed to investigate professionally, efficiently and effectively. Criminal investigations were badly managed. The conclusion, the force was institutionally incompetent.
I think the investigation into the causes of Robbie's death has just been dogged by the most tragic series of mistakes and matters really that were out of people's control, that every mistake that could have been made seems to have been made.
Both Chief Superintendent Daniels and the then head of CID, Dyfed-Powys, have retired. Both declined to be interviewed for this programme. So did Chief Constable Grange, but he did agree to meet the Powells. Last year they went to police headquarters near Carmarthen. They'd been told they'd get an apology.
He came in and was quite rude, not to put too fine a point on it. He said he was sorry, but he wouldn't answer any question that I wished to ask him. He would say no comment, or I'm not answering that question, which I think was ridiculous. He came into that room to give my wife and I an apology about institutional incompetence of Dyfed-Powys Police, which he said was only a form of words. These don't seem to appear to accept the findings of even the Somerset Constabulary.
The full report has never been made public or given to the Powell family, despite repeated requests.
In this particular case, I think that it would be instructive and useful for it to be made public. But ultimately, the gift of the report is in the hands of the particular Chief Constable.
Another Chief Constable was also to apologise to the Powells. Keith Turner of Gwent had been the deputy at Dyfed-Powys in the 90s.
I made a formal complaint about Mr Turner, who became involved after I was unhappy with Mr Thomas. Mr Turner then failed to respond to correspondence. He treated me with the same contempt that Mr Thomas had treated me with for years. That resulted in a formal complaint against Mr Turner to the then Chief Constable.
Mr Turner has now retired. When we interviewed him for another programme, we asked him about the Powell case.
Sorry, don't go there, please. It's wholly inappropriate for you to go there now.
Mr Turner was cleared of all complaints, but he did write to the Powells to apologise for not answering all their letters. The investigation started by Bob Poole had led to a damning indictment of the Dyfed-Powys police. But there was more. In the final part of the Robbie Powell story, evidence that these two doctors may have forged some of his medical records.